All right. So I wanted to pop on here really fast. I wanted to talk about Tom Brady retiring. So a couple days have now passed since he made the announcement on his Instagram story, which is kind of crazy for a 44-year-old to do that. But given the magnitude of his career, I couldn't ignore it. And to this day, even though I still cannot stand the New England Patriots, I kind of had could care less about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What Tom Brady did was honestly pretty spectacular. 22 years in the NFL, and it's weird because not only did he kick the shit out of the Chargers regular season, postseason, and I'll get into those particular losses in just a second. It's crazy because it feels like there's like a passing of the torch, right? So within the last few years, you had Eli Manning retire, you had Philip Rivers retire, Big Ben retired a couple weeks ago. Aaron Rodgers is probably on his way out. I over under how many years left in his career? Maybe two and a half. Maybe take the under on that. I don't know where his priorities are right now. And then you have Tom Brady, right? So about last week, Adam Schefter leaks on ESPN that him and Jeff Darlington, that Tom Brady's done, that he was planning on retiring after 22 years in the league. Now, it obviously took the internet by storm and people started pouring out tribute videos and all this stuff. Now, it's interesting because, you know, normally you can't just throw out, oh, greatest of all time. And this isn't going to turn into like First Take or Get Up on ESPN, all that fucking shit you see on TV. But there is something that you have to acknowledge about 22 years in the NFL. And look, Google exists. I don't need to spew all the stats. You guys are well aware. 10 Super Bowl appearances. He had 7 rings. I mean, that's wow. I mean, and there was a case, the David Tyree catch, the Mario Manningham catch, the Eagles Super Bowl. He could have had 10. I mean, just all, 10 and 0, but that's besides the point. And it's just nuts because when I think of when I first started watching football and really understanding it, right? So, I grew up in the Madden era. I played Madden. He was always in it. But I probably started understanding and watching football consistently maybe 2003, 2004 for sure. Like the year San Diego went 12-4. They lost to the fucking Jets in the playoffs overtime. It sucked. Okay. That was like the Drew Brees year, second to last year. Tomlinson was, really taking off. Antonio Gates, Marty Schottenheimer was still there. San Diego Chargers still at Qualcomm. But that's when I kind of really started understanding the sport, right? And it wasn't just kind of regurgitating what my dad would say because he was, was still a diehard fan and watches them every Sunday. So he kind of bred that, for me and my brother and my cousin, just family growing up. So it's just crazy because as far as I can remember, and look, I can look up all the highlights on YouTube. I could see the Montanas and I could see the Troy Aikmans, and I could see the Terry Bradshaw, Steve Youngs. From my mind's eye, like when I think of, older football, those quarterbacks I just listed that retired or, including Rodgers, that's almost done, that was the era of like my childhood, which is kind of nuts because it's kind of like closing the door on it. And it really hit me within the last probably 48 hours where, these last couple of years when he was in Tampa Bay, I really took every play that I could in. Now, normally I watch Red Zone and I'm a degenerate, and so I have action on almost every game and the fantasy and daily fantasy. Like there's like 8 different things I could watch at once, which honestly isn't that healthy, but yeah, it is what it is. But even during the COVID year, when his first year in Tampa Bay, and then this last year, there was just this weird cloud where a lot of people were collectively thinking, "Wow, what if this is it? Like, what if he just walks away?" He's not going to go Derek Jeter style where he gets a farewell tour, his entire last season. And even in the playoffs, right? So they lost the Rams a couple weeks ago. He was down 27-3. And look, we already know about all his heroics in the Super Bowls. They hadn't been to Terry's early in his career. Could have went 19-0, but lost on the David Tyree catch to the Giants. Rallied back, beat Russell Wilson. He threw it and got intercepted by Malcolm Butler when they should have had enough to Marshawn Lynch. 28-3, that was, I think that's where it kind of solidified that he was going to be the greatest. That was his 5th Super Bowl. They beat the Falcons. You're a Falcons fan. Wow. That's just unfortunate. So there's all these special moments, right? And it just hit personally because, like I said, as I mentioned earlier, as far as I can remember, he's always been a part of the game. Whether I tune into like the CBS pregame show, the Fox pregame show, Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, podcasts as I got older, network shows, radio shows, he was always a part of it. And it's kind of crazy because now we're in this new phase and, Pro Football Focus is creating graphics like, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen as like the next faces of a new generation of football. And it's kind of nuts because there's kids now that are starting to learn the game. And it's different now because they have smartphones and social media and like TikTok, a lot of NFL content now specifically is made into snackable pieces where you're probably watching 10 to 12, 15-second increments of action. You're not actually sitting down watching the games. Now, I don't want to start sounding archaic or anything, but I mean, that's just how I was. I watched every game. So it's weird, but it's also kind of cool because this is, I guess, the doorstep to the future, which is kind of scary too. So if you listen this far, I appreciate it. But I talked earlier about how like the San Diego tie, right? So as far as I can remember, it's not that long ago, but I remember Drew Brees going into New England the year after they won the Super Bowl, after they repeated, and San Diego beat them in Foxborough at Gillette. I mean, it like drubbed them. I think it was like 41-17 or something like that. And that was the last time the Chargers beat the Patriots. Philip Rivers, and that was Drew Brees. And then that next year, he was in New Orleans after he tore up his shoulder. Everyone knows that story. So, and then Philip Rivers, the legend, was born. Phil's still my boy. He's still my boy. But Justin Herbert, keep an eye out for him. But that's a separate day. He'll get his time. He needs to make the postseason too. But no, I mean, it's just crazy because over the next, that was in 2005. What is it? 17 years ago. Wow. 17 years. Whether it was a regular season, I remember in the 2006 season, the Chargers' magical year, the 14-2 year. And I'm going to die on this hill. That you talk about the butterfly effect, the biggest what if, like what if the Chargers win the Super Bowl? Because they should have, because people were talking about Tom Brady, who's been in like, I think 20 AFC or NFC championship games, which is nuts. But that year, San Diego, Tomlinson wins the MVP. They're 14-2, and the Patriots come in. They had a bye. They go into Mission Valley. They play at Qualcomm. Everyone's picking the Chargers. And you just think if they would have taken care of business, that's the Marlon McCree game. I mean, if you ask any diehard San Diego fan, Marlon McCree, their heart just drops. It's like they see a ghost, right? Like, I want to be 80 years old one day. Hopefully I can make it that far. And, if you mention Marlon McCree, I'll roll my eyes and hopefully I won't croak at that point. But the play I'm referring to, obviously, is when he intercepts Tom Brady, and then Troy Brown strips him, and then they get the ball back and they fucking score the next play. Riche Caldwell, his big ass eyes. Rest in peace, by the way. It's crazy how he's dead. That was kind of dark. But so if they would have won that game, they would have hosted Indianapolis the next week in the AFC title game. And at that point, San Diego just had Indy's number. They loved playing against Manning because that next season, that was the Cromartie 3 picks game where he threw 6 interceptions, Peyton Manning did. And just collectively over the years, they beat him in the playoffs. So you think that was the Chargers' year to do it. It's just if Troy Brown doesn't strip Marlon McCree, then Tom Brady doesn't get the ball back. And that could have changed everything because then they would have played the Chicago Bears that year in Miami where it was rainy and they're going to lose to Rex Grossman and Musim and Hobbit. Like, get out of here. No way. Like, that should have been the Chargers' year. Like I said, I'm going to die on that hill. But, everything happens for a reason. And who knows if they win the Super Bowl, maybe they're still in San Diego. But, Brady goes on to go to the title game and they were up like 18 points against Indy. That's where Peyton Manning came back. Then he won his first Super Bowl, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But you just look at what, the next year too. So they go 2007. That was the 19-0 potential season for the Patriots. They go 16-0 in the regular season. And then who do they have to beat to get to the Super Bowl? Fucking San Diego. The Chargers go to New England and it was like 4 degrees out. That was the game where Tomlinson said he was pouting, sulking. He had his helmet on and the jacket. He was dealing with a knee injury. That was the year. Philip Rivers tore his ACL. And they won like 21-12. I think Nate Kading kicked like 4 field goals. So, they go and play the Giants, Eli Manning in Phoenix, or in Glendale, excuse me, a couple weeks later, and the David Tyree catch. I mean, it's just nuts. It's crazy because if you look at, he had like 3 different Hall of Fame careers. You had like the first, like the 2000s, right? The early 2000s, they beat the Rams. I mean, surprisingly, that was the greatest show on turf. A couple years later, they beat, this is the ad of Vinatieri. They beat the Panthers. They beat the Eagles. So he has 3 titles in his first like 5 years in the league, 6 years. And then he goes 10 years without winning it. Like I mentioned, he loses to the Giants twice. So we already know about that. The second Super Bowl with the Giants, that was in Indianapolis. In the AFC Championship game, that's when rookie Gronkowski, or maybe it was his second year, he sprains his ankle against the Chiefs, or was it the Ravens? I know it was Bernard Pollard. I think it was against the Ravens. And then Mario Manningham, and then they lose, right? So then it's like, wow, can they get it done? And then a few years later, they go back to Glendale again, and they play the Seahawks. And the Russell Wilson, they were up 10 points in the fourth quarter, and Brady rallies them. And at that point, people are saying, what is he cursed? Can he get it done again? Will he ever win another Super Bowl? So he rallies them back, takes the lead, and then the Seahawks are driving. I mean, they're on the 5-yard line. Everyone's seen this play. Decides to throw a slant, and Malcolm Butler picks it off. And it was crazy because in some articles and documentaries and interviews, that Bill Belichick really harped on that play, and they had practiced it all week. He said, you need to be prepared if that happens. And then he does it. So he gets that Super Bowl. A couple years later, you have Deflategate. I mean, it's not, at 22 years is a really, really long time. I mean, you ask like the average NFL fan, they're just going to assume that he was probably in the Super Bowl every other year. I mean, he went 10 years without winning a Super Bowl, or getting back to it. And obviously he beats the Falcons 28-3, loses to the Eagles next year. I mean, Philly special, right? Loses to Nick Foles. I mean, that was the year when like everyone thought Carson Wentz was the next big deal. Then he tears his ACL against the Rams in like week 9 of that 2017 season. And the crazy thing is, against that Eagles team, I mean, Brady threw for like 505 yards, like 3 TDs, no turnovers. They never punted. Philadelphia was just able to exploit the defense, and you're just like, wow. I mean, I think Edelman tore his ACL that year. And then the next year they recalibrate, and then they beat the Rams, who were averaging almost 33 points a game that season in the 2018 season. And, to go back a little further, in the AFC title game, that was the, year of Mahomes. He broke out, he threw 50 touchdowns, he won MVP. And, D Ford lines up offsides, and if he doesn't line up offsides, the KC probably wins that game. And then the fortune of Mahomes, probably going to a couple more Super Bowls, takes off. But that wasn't the case. D Ford lines up offsides. They give the first down. New England goes and scores on that Rex Burkhead touchdown OT. And then they go and beat the Rams. That was the 13-3 game. Super boring. I think like Travis Scott performed at halftime. That was like the SpongeBob, Bubble Bowl holograms he had in it. But that just goes to show they had another one, right? So the next season, that's his last season in New England. The Antonio Brown, they had no receivers. And then, they lose in the wild card game to the Tennessee Titans. Brady's last pass of his career was an interception to Logan Ryan. It was like a walk-off interception OT touchdown. And at that point, no one knew what he was going to do. There was some people that were like, wow, what if he actually does just call it? Well, a lot of people didn't. And then he eventually ends up in Tampa Bay. And then, not to rip off a band. Actually, I don't want to say rip off a Band-Aid, because I think the wound is still fresh. But that ensuing spring was COVID. That's when the pandemic hit, and coronavirus just wiped out and turned the world to shit. God, that sucked. The fact that we're still in it almost 2 years later. Are you serious? So then he goes to Tampa Bay, and, it was a super tough season. And I don't give a fuck what your view on it is. And this isn't the anti-vax or vax. It's just, they had to weather that storm. The NFL had to deal with it, and certain policies that the league officials made them go through, and testing every day, no fans. And then, they start off the season kind of shaky. Brady gets swept by the Saints in the regular season, and then they catch fire towards the end of the year and they go on a roll. They beat the Saints in the playoffs, and then, or they beat, the Washington football team, and then they beat the Saints, and then they beat Green Bay, where, at some point you would have thought Aaron Rodgers would have won a Super Bowl in the last 5 years, but can't get it done. It's the same movie we see every year with the Packers in Green Bay. You roll through the regular season, and then that's it. So, Brady leads the Bucks in the Lambeau. I remember it was like the first afternoon game, so it's still sunny out when the game started, and beats them and gets to the Super Bowl, where they're going to face off Mahomes. And that was a weird year for the Chiefs. They were dealing with some injuries as well. That was the same playoffs where like Mahomes got knocked out against the Browns, and then the week of the Super Bowl. I mean, this is tragic, but like Andy Reid's son like kills a 5 or 6 year old, was operating a vehicle under the influence. So, there's a lot of external factors that went into that game for the Chiefs in terms of distractions and everything else. And then what does Brady do? He gets another Super Bowl, another one, his 7th. I mean, that's just nuts. And then infamously, he throws the Lombardi trophy on the boat, getting drunk, walking through the crowd. He's all stumbling. Looks like all of us after a bar every Friday night, except he has his 7th Super Bowl ring. And then this season, everyone's saying, is he going to play till he's 45? I don't know. And then he just retires right after the season. They lose to the Rams. They beat the Eagles in the wild card round, which was kind of a given. I don't know how the Eagles backed their way in. I think the Saints should have made the playoffs, but maybe it's the Rams' year. And Stafford playing pretty well. And at one point it was 27-3, and you're thinking, wow, okay. Well, we've seen this before. Brady's going to pull it off. He has the bloody lip. It's just interesting, man. I really learned to respect Brady over the last couple decades, which is nuts. And you got to give it to him. As soon as he got to Tampa Bay, he really opened up, started doing way more documentaries. And we already knew about the Tom versus Time. But, I still need to watch The Man in Arena. That's what his new one is on ESPN Plus. But, his social media team making the hype up videos, and he's on Twitter and Instagram. I mean, he retired on Instagram. Tom Brady retired on Instagram. He has crypto commercials. He still has endorsements for watches and Subway. I mean, dude's just killing it. Still married to Giselle. She's fucking beautiful. Good for him. It's nuts, man. It's nuts. Because, I mean, you ask anyone age, hell, maybe 19 to 20 years old to 48. I mean, in that range. And obviously older, but, the older people 50 and older are going to know who Brady is. But I'm talking like that era. They grew up with him, right? Like your childhood, teenage years, high school, college, post-grad. Maybe you start a family, right? Maybe you have a family. Maybe you're married. Maybe you have kids. And now they have other kids. I don't know. But Brady was there every Sunday. He missed one season. That was because he tore his ACL. And Bernard Pollard just dove right into his knee, and it was shredded. And the only other games he missed was that 4-game suspension with Deflategate. That was the year, Jimmy Garoppolo played and they got hurt his shoulder. They got Jacoby Brissett, and they came back. They won the Super Bowl. So really stuck with Goodell. Oh, Goodell. Man, the whole Brian Flores thing right now. Yeah, so I mean, I went way too long on this, but so if you watch this far, I really appreciate it. But yeah, I just, beating San Diego in 2006 in the divisional round, beating San Diego in the AFC title game the next year. Rivers never got back. And then ensuing seasons, they came to Mission Valley, or the Chargers would go to New England, and they can never beat the Patriots, for whatever reason. But he was always there. And he's got to respect what Brady did. He really transformed his career. And just to reiterate, I mean, he had 3 different careers, 3 different Hall of Fame careers. 7 Super Bowls, crazy. I mean, he's accounted for 12.9% of all Super Bowls of all time. We're never going to see anything like that. And I hate throwing around the Michael Jordan stuff. No disrespect to him, but it's just so overplayed. The GOAT, who's the best. He's the greatest team sport athlete of all time. And it's weird. I think it won't really hit us until next football season. But, until then, I mean, I wish him the best. It was an honor to watch. It was really, really cool. He ripped my heart out a bunch of times playing against my team growing up, and then betting. You should never bet against him. So that, I mean, respect, tip of the cap. Tom Brady retired after 22 seasons. Just thought I'd share my thoughts.